Voilà. Donc merci Jean-Guillaume de m'accorder la parole.
Thanks for allowing me to take the floor, Jean-Guillaume. Just a moment before we all go. So, I haven't had the opportunity of meeting all of you, but I'd just like to say that I'm the French manager for the Naumann Foundation for Freedom that was presented to you yesterday by Thomas Enker, our regional manager. And it's now incumbent upon us to introduce you to a student grant recipient. There are students who are in degrees and postgraduate studies, and it's important to include the younger generation in this event. And then we have 15 or so students here, and we've had them with us for the last 2 days. But without further ado, before handing over to Joshua and Helena, who are master's students in international relations in Geneva, just like to express my gratitude and the joy that I felt from a personal perspective, but also as a member of the foundation, to have been able to contribute to these 2 days of captivating intellectual philosophical debates. But also, let's not forget politics, about democracy in France, America and Europe more broadly. So thanks very much for this very intense and enriching 2-day event. So Joshua is now going to come onto the rostrum and provide some concluding comments and share his observations over this 2-day event. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you to one and all. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and have this opportunity of speaking before you, and also having been able to join you in this fabulous event. This event is crucial, necessary in our age. I'm here with a group of students, as was said, who we're doing our studies in Europe and more specifically in Germany. And it's very important to have a discussion about the future of democracy. It's a matter that goes over and beyond the typical daily practice. And this is why I wanted to say 1 or 2 words.
More fluid and more quick. So I have the impression that we as Westerners living in liberal democracy over the last years, we had a safe time, and suddenly through the roof rain came in and we didn't know what was going on. We live in a time of crisis, and there are holes in this roof, and the rain comes down, we get wet, and we were wondering, where does it come from? And how do we get to a state where we are safe and self-assured in ourselves again? And that sounds uncomfortable, but I firmly believe that terms of crises are very, very important. Crises are necessary for evolution, and evolution never happens without crises and challenges. And actually the name for challenge in German is Herausforderung. And Herausforderung, the literal meaning of that is that there's something that triggers you out of where you've been before. And without that trigger, you would remain there forever. And there's a famous quote by Churchill who said that democracy is the worst system we could live in, with the exception of all the others. And I think that reflects that democracy has a lot of advantages, but the state of democracy that we found ourselves in maybe is not the solution to all the problems, and we need to find new solutions now. And I think the seminar here and some points that I shortly want to summarize, I think are very important steps on that journey. So there are 4 main things that I take away from this conference, 4 big topics. And the first one being that we had a great opportunity to listen to some big geopolitical thoughts. So I come from a young generation who grew up in peace and prosperity in Europe. But the generation of my grandfathers, just 1 hour away from here, fought battles of the Second World War. The generation of my fathers lived in a divided country, which was at the core of the Cold War. And it's important to not take that for granted, and also see that there's a responsibility that comes with the freedom that we enjoy as a young generation. And that we need to step up for the values that are at the core of our foundation, because we need to reaffirm them with the same strength that is attacking those values at the same time. So it is also, and I believe that we can do this because at the same time we are not only maybe a lazy generation, but we are the generation with the greatest potential. We have great access to university, to education, and we traveled around the world. We are connected across the world, so I have great faith that we can do it, but it's important to have the affirmation that it's necessary to do it and to take these steps. And I think these geopolitical thoughts about the threats that are coming from outside and they're attacking our values are very necessary in this discussion, especially in a European context. We're living in a European Union, but it's not really a union. It's on paper it's a union, but there's a lot of disagreement and we're unable internationally in terms of foreign policy to act with one voice. It's chaos. And I think looking into the future, we cannot afford to live with this chaos and this incapability of taking firm decisions if we want to maintain our place in the world. And therefore I think it's very important that on the European level we grow together stronger and we step up to the game and proceed, face the challenges that we're facing and with unity and with a strong shared perception of the values that unite us. I think a second very big topic that we talked about was populism and Trump and what's going to happen after Trump. And of course, that's a huge topic. And this populist strike struck democracies across the world in the last 5-10 years. It's a movement which has remarkable similarities across these countries. And I think today we had the very, very important moment because we had people from both sides also yesterday talking with each other, and that became very rare. I think if we want to overcome these crises, which is dominated by rage, by hate, by fear, we need to step beyond this emotional barrier that was constructed at the surface and to look at the root causes. There's a shared understanding that we arrived at yesterday in this discussion that I want to remind you of, that there are root causes for this hate, that there has been industrial offshoring that ripped people apart and understandably put them into a position of disillusionment and fear, and which put them into a position where they're easily exploited by politicians that use that fear and offer solutions to that. And the solution to that is not to go against the political apparatus that may abuse these dynamics, but to look at the core of these dynamics. And if we have a discussion about these core dynamics, we can also get together again. Because we are on the same page again, people who support those populist movements and who are kind of challenging their status quo. And even besides that, if we don't address those root causes, we're in deep trouble. And the trouble is not only that populist politicians will come up and create drama and make us feel uncomfortable, but these problems are there and they need to be addressed, and they have not been sufficiently addressed over the last years. And I think that forums like this one need to be happening much more to establish a dialogue and to come back to that common grounding and to even look for more than these, because we only had a short time to speak today and yesterday, but there need to be many more discussions like this. Thirdly, I think a very important point that I also will keep on reflecting about is social media, because it came up over the last years and it revolutionized our way of coexistence globally, and it's often used as a demonizing concept that allowed this political turmoil to immerse. However, I think it's valuable to look back in history and to see some comparison. When the letterpress was invented, it also revolutionized how people could access information. In the 1800s, the letterpress was invented, and suddenly institutions were shocked to their core because people had access to information, and it triggered institutional reform and social reform. However, that took time, and the established institutions, what they did at first was they tried to censor everything and to prevent people from accessing those informations that were suddenly available to them. And however, over time, we found a balance between censorship and the defense of freedom of speech. And I think that now, being overwhelmed with this medium, we have not yet found that balance. We have had an approach to let it go for until it crashes, and then we have some individuals who control these social media who are at the trigger point. And I think that is not a sustainable way how we will deal with challenges related to social media in the future. So it's not a question about social media good or bad, it's a question of how do we arrange ourselves with it, because it's there if we want it or not, and it also has great advantages and possibilities for us into the future. For my generation, I could not imagine growing up without social media, because it's a great tool for me to stay connected to people that I meet here and that I meet all over the world. And so it's important to not have this black and white thinking about, social media is the core of all problems. No, it's the way how we interact with it and what we make out of it. And the last point that I want to talk about is, that also was part of this panel right now, it's identity politics and racism. And my generation is very engaged in movements like Fridays for Future, for racial justice, and typically young people are very idealistic. They envision a world that is completely different from the one we have now, and they argue for ideals, and sometimes they lack maybe the awareness for practical concerns that people in older ages are and have been confronted with, like here today. And I'm thankful that we have been made aware of the challenges when those movements develop kind of religious dynamics and become exclusionary, and also with the right intentions of, for instance, establishing equality, also inflict harm upon people that are innocent. So this is something that I will also keep thinking about, is how do we find a way to nonetheless pursue these goals, because they are valuable. We're talking about our Western values when we talk about Russia and China and so on, but when do we talk about these values in our own society? Do we have equality? And do we have equal opportunities and tolerance? These values, we first need to do our own homework. And to do that, it's very important. Thanks to this discussion today, I realize it's not easy. You can't go just full way into one direction. You need to have a balanced approach. And I think that also like forums like this can be a very useful resource to collectively find that shared approach between idealistic goals but also practical implementation. And with that, I now leave this conference together with my other fellow scholarship holders. And I'm very thankful to have been here. I think that the family Tocqueville did a wonderful job at organizing, hosting all this. It felt really like it really felt like being invited at a friend's home or something, because your family is all walking around, the dog is walking around. It is a very familiar setting, and nonetheless, I think also a very important one. So I think it's fantastic that you have these facilities here and that you use them for such a good cause. And I hope it continues in the future to bring more benefits like the ones that it brought now already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I think there's nothing further to add, really. A wonderful concluding comment. It was intelligent and moving. So thanks very much. I would like to revisit one point that my family and the Tocqueville Foundation and myself, we heard this on a number of occasions, particularly on this rostrum. We heard a number of times that Tocqueville was a place that furthered dialogue. Nothing could sing so beautifully in our ears. So the 2021 edition of our event is now over. I wish you all a safe trip home. We'll meet up again for the next edition. And I would just, by way of conclusion, like to thank our speakers who did fabulous work and animated wonderful debate. And our friend, of course, Laure Monville, thank you to her. Thank you to one and all for your attendance. And also, I'd like to thank you for coming sometimes, as the Americans would say, having traversed the pond, the Atlantic Ocean. It's wonderful to be able to welcome you here. And I would also like to thank the team who've organized all the logistics and the interpreters who have done a wonderful job. Thanks to them, thanks to all these energies rolled into one, we've had a wonderful, wonderful day in 2 days. Thanks very much to one and all.